What if I told you that the calendar and the water temperature gauge you trust are lying to you about the spring crappie bite? Seriously, that expensive fish finder you rely on is only telling you a fraction of the story. Today, we're diving into the real reason why crappies move into the shallows a full 2 weeks before you and most other anglers even think about looking for them there. By the end of this video, you'll understand the one critical sign you've been overlooking, the one that puts you on the fish while everyone else is still waiting at home. This is the exact reason you show up to your favorite spot and feel like you've just missed the party. So let me ask you, what water temperature do you wait for before you start fishing shallow for crappie? 55 degrees? 60? Drop it in the comments because I promise you we're about to completely challenge that number. For generations, we've been taught to watch the surface temperature. It's the golden rule of spring fishing. Everyone has their magic number. It's a belief passed down from our grandfathers, and it makes sense on the surface. Warmer water means more active fish. It's a simple, easy-to-follow rule that gives us a tangible starting point for the season. The problem is, it's an incomplete picture and it's costing you fish. This habit of waiting for a specific surface temperature is why so many fishing trips in early spring end in frustration. You spend hours searching deep water or transition banks convinced it's not time yet, all while the fish you're looking for are already feasting in water so shallow you wouldn't think to cast there. Today we're going to break that old habit by looking at the lake not as a single body of water, but as a collection of tiny, fast-changing micro-environments. First, let's officially kill the myth of the magic surface temperature. Think about it. You launch your boat on a calm, sunny morning and the screen reads 52 degrees. By the afternoon, after a cold wind picks up, it might read 49. The surface temperature is incredibly volatile. It is influenced by air temperature, wind, and overnight cooling. It is the least stable temperature in the entire lake. Yet, we have pinned all our hopes and based our entire spring strategy on this wildly fluctuating number. Crappie are creatures of instinct that have survived for millennia. They don't base their life-altering migration to the spawning grounds on something that changes hour by hour. They are responding to a much more powerful and consistent trigger, one that happens long before the surface of the lake gets the memo. Relying on surface temp is like trying to predict the weather by looking only at the puddle in your driveway. You're missing the bigger picture. So if the surface temperature is a liar, what's the truth? The real trigger is solar radiation heating the lake bottom. This is the engine that drives the entire spring migration. In the early spring, the sun's angle is still low, but it's getting stronger every day. While it might not have enough power to heat the entire water column, it has more than enough energy to penetrate the first few feet of clear, cold water and bake the lake bed. This is where the magic begins. The lake bottom, especially if it's dark, acts like a massive solar collector. It absorbs and stores the sun's heat far more effectively than the water itself. Imagine a dark-colored car sitting in the sun on a cool day. The air might be chilly, but the hood of that car is hot to the touch. The same exact principle is at work on the bottom of the lake, creating a thin layer of significantly warmer water right where it matters most. To truly understand this, you have to stop thinking like a fisherman and start thinking like the things a crappie eats. A big crappie doesn't move into a foot of water for fun, risking exposure to birds and other predators. It moves there for one reason, and one reason only: to eat. The entire food chain is jump-started by this bottom-warming phenomenon. The very first thing to react to this newfound warmth is microscopic life, algae and zooplankton. They begin to bloom on the sun-baked mud and gravel weeks before the rest of the lake shows any signs of life. This initial bloom is the dinner bell. It's the foundational layer of the entire spring food web. Where this microscopic life goes, everything else follows. The crappie aren't chasing a specific water temperature. They are chasing the chain reaction that starts when the sun's rays first begin to warm the bottom. Let's talk about the specific locations where this happens first. You need to look for shallow flats and coves with a dark bottom composition. We're talking mud, dark gravel, decaying leaves, or the remnants of last year's weed beds. These dark materials are incredibly efficient at absorbing solar energy. A light-colored sand or rock bottom will reflect sunlight and stay much cooler. A dark, muddy bottom will soak it up and radiate heat. Furthermore, the best spots are often on the northern side of the lake or in the back of coves with a northern exposure. Why? Because these areas receive the most direct sunlight throughout the day as the sun tracks across the southern sky. They are shielded from cold north winds and get an all-day solar bath. A shallow, muddy flat on the north bank is the absolute prime real estate for this early season activity to kick off. This is where we find the 2-week gap. On a sunny 40-degree air temperature day in early spring, the surface of the lake might be only 45 degrees. Most anglers would see that number and stay home. But if you could take a thermometer and stick it into the mud in 2 feet of water on a north-facing bank, you might get a reading of 55 or even 60 degrees. There can easily be a 10 to 15 degree difference between the surface water and the water in direct contact with that superheated bottom. This thin layer of warm water is an oasis. It's a habitable zone that kicks life into gear. The crappie, which may be staging just outside in slightly deeper, colder water, can sense this temperature difference. They will move into that shallow, warm zone for a few hours each day to feed long before the main body of the lake is even close to their preferred temperature. Let's visualize the chain of events. Day 1 of a sunny stretch, the dark bottom warms up. Day 2, the microscopic life begins to bloom, creating a protein-rich soup on the bottom. Day 3, tiny insects and aquatic larvae hatch and begin to feed on this bloom. Day 4, schools of small minnows, the primary food source for crappie, move into these shallows to gorge on the insects and larvae. By day 5, the crappie get the message. The buffet is open. They will push into these shallow, sun-drenched areas to hunt the concentrated schools of minnows. This all happens while the surface temperature of the main lake may have only risen a degree or two. You, the angler, show up 2 weeks later when the surface finally reads 58 degrees, but by then the crappie have been feeding in this pattern for a fortnight. You've missed the easiest, most predictable part of the bite. So, how do you find these spots without just guessing? It's about observation. Forget your electronics for a moment and just use your eyes. Look for the coves and shorelines that get the most sun. On a calm day, you might even see a subtle shimmer on the water in these areas, indicating a temperature difference. Look for the very first signs of green. Maybe it's the first shoots of new lily pads or submerged grass. This new growth can only happen where the bottom is getting enough warmth and sunlight. Another huge clue is the presence of other life. If you see turtles sunning themselves on logs in a particular cove, that's a massive indicator. Turtles are cold-blooded and instinctively know where the warmest water is. Follow the turtles and you will very often find the crappie. These are the natural clues that anglers have used for centuries, long before we had digital temperature gauges. Wind plays a crucial and often confusing role in this early season. A strong, cold wind can completely disrupt this pattern. It can churn the water, mixing the cold surface water with the warm bottom layer and effectively erasing the temperature difference you're looking for. This is why protected areas are so key. You want to find those coves and pockets that are sheltered from the prevailing wind. A bay with a high bank or a thick stand of trees blocking the wind will allow the sun to do its work without interruption. On the other hand, a wind that has been blowing into a shallow bay for a day or two can stack up the warmer surface water, if there is any, making that shoreline a good place to check. But as a general rule for this ultra-early bite, calm and protected is what you are looking for. You want a stable environment where that fragile layer of warm bottom water can form and hold. Now let's talk about timing during the day. This isn't an all-day bite. The best window is almost always going to be in the afternoon. In the morning, after a long, cold night, the water temperature will be at its lowest point. The bottom will have lost much of the heat it stored the previous day. The fish will likely be inactive or pulled back to slightly deeper water. But as the sun gets higher in the sky from noon to about 4 p.m., that solar engine really gets going. The bottom heats up, the food chain activates, and the crappie move in. So if you only have a few hours to fish, don't waste them on an early morning trip. Sleep in, have a good breakfast, and hit the water in the afternoon when the sun has had a chance to work its magic. You are fishing a pattern that is 100% dependent on the sun, so fish when the sun is at its strongest. Many fishermen who do stumble upon this early bite by accident often dismiss it as a fluke. They'll catch a few fish in a shallow spot way earlier than they expected and call it a false start. They assume a few rogue fish just moved up and that the main population is still deep. This is a critical misunderstanding. It is not a false start, it is the real start. These aren't just a few random, confused fish. These are the most aggressive, actively feeding fish in the school. They are the pioneers, the ones leading the charge. This period offers some of the best fishing of the entire year because the fish are concentrated in very specific, predictable locations, and they are there to eat. By understanding the science behind it, you realize it's not luck. It's a repeatable pattern that you can target year after year, giving you a massive head start on the season. Your electronics can actually work against you here if you don't know how to interpret them. Your fish finder's transducer, which measures water temperature, is typically mounted on the transom of your boat. It's reading the surface temperature, sometimes a foot or two down. When you're fishing in 2 feet of water, that reading is essentially useless for this pattern. It doesn't tell you the temperature on the bottom where the action is. This is a time to trust your instincts and your eyes more than your screen. Use your electronics to look for depth changes, to find the edges of shallow flats where fish might stage, but ignore that surface temperature reading. It's providing you with irrelevant data for this specific situation. The real temperature gauge is the sun on your face and the dark bottom you're casting towards. Let's put this into a real-life scenario. Picture a large reservoir in late March. The air is crisp, maybe 45 degrees. The main lake water temperature on your graph reads 48. Conventional wisdom says to fish deep brush piles or channel ledges, but you, armed with this new knowledge, ignore the main lake. You head straight to a small, protected cove on the north shore. The back of it is a large, muddy flat that's only 2 to 3 feet deep. The sun is beating down on it. You can't see any fish on your graph, there are no obvious signs of life, but you know the bottom here is likely 10 degrees warmer than the surrounding water. You make a long cast with a small jig and a bobber. Set just 1.5 feet deep, you work it incredibly slowly, and then the bobber disappears. That's not a fluke. That is predictable, pattern-based fishing. The gear and presentation for this early bite need to be adjusted accordingly. These fish are not in a hyper-aggressive territorial spawning mode yet. They are there to feed, but they can still be a bit lethargic from the cold water they just came from. This means finesse is key. Light line, maybe 4-pound test, is a must. Small baits are going to outperform large ones. Think 1/32nd or 1/64th ounce jigs. The presentation needs to be painfully slow. This is the perfect time for a bobber or float. It allows you to suspend your tiny jig in that thin layer of warm water right off the bottom and hold it perfectly still. Let the gentle ripple on the water provide all the action you need. A fast retrieve will pull your bait right out of the strike zone and likely spook the fish. Slow down, then slow down some more. The type of bite you'll get is also different. Don't expect the violent thump you might get during the peak spawn. Because the fish are still coming out of their winter sluggishness, the bite is often incredibly light. Sometimes the float will just barely dip. Other times it might just lay on its side as the crappie sucks in the jig and moves up with it. This is called a lift bite. If you are casting and retrieving, you might just feel a slight mushy weight on the end of your line. You have to be a line watcher. If you see your line twitch or move sideways in a way that seems unnatural, set the hook. And these subtle bites are a sign that you are in the right place at the right time. An aggressive, fast presentation will completely miss these fish. We also have to consider water clarity. This bottom heating effect is most pronounced in relatively clear water. The The sunlight needs to be able to penetrate to the bottom to warm it up. If you're on a lake that is muddy or heavily stained from spring rains, this pattern will be much less effective, or it will be confined to the absolute shallowest water, maybe less than a foot deep. In stained water, the sunlight gets absorbed by the suspended particles in the water column, and it can't reach the bottom to heat it. So this is a pattern that shines brightest on lakes with good water clarity. On those muddy water systems, you might actually have to wait for the water temperature to rise in a more traditional way. It's another variable you have to consider when you're deciding on your game plan. Here is a simple, practical experiment you can do to prove this to yourself. On the next sunny, cool spring day, go to a lake with a boat ramp that has a gentle slope. Wade into the water until it's about knee-deep. Feel the temperature of the water around your legs. It will feel cold. Now reach down and put your bare hand flat on the dark-colored sediment or gravel on the bottom. You will be shocked at how warm it feels in comparison. It will feel like a different world. That is the warm water oasis we've been talking about. You are feeling the solar radiation at work. Once you physically feel that temperature difference for yourself, the entire concept will click into place, and you'll never look at a shallow, sunny bank the same way again. It's a powerful and tangible confirmation of the principle. The mental shift is perhaps the most difficult part of adopting this strategy. We are creatures of habit. For years, maybe decades, you have waited for a certain date on the calendar or a certain number on a screen. To abandon that comfort and trust in a new set of clues, the sun's angle, the bottom color, the wind direction, can feel like you're flying blind. It requires you to unlearn some of the first things you were ever taught about fishing. You have to be willing to go out and potentially fail a few times while you're building confidence in the pattern. You have to trust the process. But once you succeed, once you get on that incredible early bite just one time, a light bulb will go on. You'll realize you've unlocked a part of the season you never knew existed. This principle doesn't just apply to crappie either. It's a universal trigger for many species. Largemouth bass, especially in northern climates, will make this same early move. They'll push up onto sunny, dark-bottomed flats to warm themselves and hunt for the first active bluegills, which are there for the same reason the minnows are. Even pike will seek out these warm, shallow, weedy bays to begin their spawning rituals. By understanding the core concept of solar heating on the bottom, you're not just learning a crappie tip, you're learning a fundamental truth about how a lake wakes up from winter. It's a key that can unlock early spring success for a variety of species. It's about seeing the lake as a living system driven by the sun, not just a big bowl of cold water. Let's talk about one more advanced detail: heat-retaining objects. It's not just dark mud that absorbs heat. Any solid object in the water can act as a heat sink. The biggest examples are rocks and riprap banks. A shoreline covered in dark-colored rocks will absorb a tremendous amount of solar energy and radiate that heat into the surrounding water. The same goes for submerged wood, like dock posts, fallen trees, or beaver lodges. These objects create small pockets of warmer water around them. In the early season, a single dock post on a sunny bank can hold a whole school of crappie. They will press right up against the wood, absorbing that radiated heat. So when you're scanning these shallow flats, pay extra attention to any piece of isolated cover. It's likely to be a fish magnet. To put it all together, you have to become a sun hunter. Your new mission in the early spring is to find the parts of the lake that get the most sun for the longest period of time, with the least amount of wind over the darkest possible bottom. When you find a spot where all of those factors converge, you have found the X. This is the starting point. This is where the first life will appear, where the first minnows will school, and where the first crappie will show up to feed. It completely changes your approach. Instead of randomly drifting across the lake staring at a screen, you are now making a highly targeted, strategic decision based on observable environmental factors. You are no longer waiting for the bite to happen. You are going to where the bite is happening right now, 2 weeks before anyone else. So, Let's recap the whole thing. The calendar is just a suggestion, and the surface temperature gauge on your boat is one of the biggest distractions in spring fishing. The real secret, the undisputed champion of triggers, is direct sunlight warming up dark lake bottoms. And this process creates a thin, warm layer of water that kickstarts the entire food chain from the bottom up. Microscopic organisms bloom, insects hatch, minnows move in to feed, and the crappie are right behind them. The big aha moment here is that you're not really fishing for crappie, you're fishing for the conditions that create crappie food. When you find that initial life bloom on a warm, shallow, sun-drenched, protected, dark bottom, you've found the starting line of the spring season. This isn't just a minor tip, it's a fundamental shift in strategy that can literally add 2 or more weeks of prime fishing to your season, letting you get in on the action while everyone else is still organizing their tackle boxes at home. Thank you so much for watching. If this changed how you think about spring fishing, do me a favor and hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next videos. Now, I really want to know, after hearing all this, are you going to change when you start your spring crappie fishing this year? Let me know your thoughts and your own experiences with this early bite in the comments below. Let's talk about it.